Good morning and welcome back. This week we're going to talk about Naaman. Today's story is Naaman is healed. Naaman was in charge of a very big army for the king of a place called Aram. He was a big, strong, and important man in his country. Sadly, Naaman had a disease called leprosy, which gave him painful sores on his body that would not go away. A young Israelite girl was a servant in Naaman's household and knew of a prophet named Elisha in her country who could heal Naaman's leprosy. When Naaman heard this, he asked the king if he could go to Israel to be healed. The king liked Naaman, so he told him he could go. Elisha heard that Naaman was coming, so Elisha sent his messenger to Naaman and told him to go wash 7 times in the river to heal his leprosy. Naaman was angry. Why didn't the prophet Elisha come here and heal me? I am an important man, he fumed. I could wash in the rivers in my own country. What's so special about this little river? He demanded. At least try, Naaman's servant exclaimed. We've come a long way. All right, Naaman muttered. He went to the edge of the river and stuck his big toe in. Nothing happened. All the way in, ordered Naaman's servant. Naaman went all the way in and came out, dripping wet. He counted with his big, booming voice every time he went into the water. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Naaman washed himself in the river 7 times, just like Elisha said to do. After the 7th time, Naaman looked down at his skin. It worked. Naaman was shocked. Now he knew that God was amazing. He went home praising and thanking God. I hope you've enjoyed this week's story. See you next week.
Hi, how are you guys? Good? Good. Well, you've heard the Bible story at some point, so I thought we would dig a little deeper. So remember, we're in 2 Kings chapter 5, verses 1 through 19. And there's a main character, a man named Naaman. And if you remember from hearing the Bible passage, Naaman was a soldier. But he wasn't just a simple soldier. He was the leader of this king's army. And this was like a neighboring area of Israel. This wasn't where like Solomon's temple is or anything like that. This was a neighboring area. And there they didn't believe in our God, they believed in many gods. One thing to keep in mind. So Naaman, in addition to being the lead soldier, the head of this king's successful army, he had a disease called leprosy. We don't hear about that very often now because there's cures for it, but it's a disease of your skin. And I believe there's all different levels. So it could just be maybe, itchy patches, or it seems like in some situations when it's a pretty bad case, like your skin can fall off. So can you imagine, have you ever had a mosquito bite or like skinned your knee or your elbow, and while it's healing, sometimes it's itchy and sometimes it stings a little? Well, that's what his body must have felt like all the time, and that cannot be a nice way to live. But it sounds like Naaman was kind of lucky in that his skin wasn't falling off, because if he was the head of the king's army, obviously he could still function even though he had leprosy. But he wanted it cured, right? Well, in his house, he acquired a new servant girl. She was from somewhere in Israel. And you know what? When she saw that he had leprosy, she happened to mention to someone that he should go to the prophet in Samaria because that prophet can heal leprosy. So what do you think happens? If you were Naaman and you had this itchy skin problem, wouldn't you want to solve it? Right. And with Naaman being this very important man, he kind of expected maybe to be able to pay for it or buy it or solve his problems. Sometimes it's the little things that can help us. Sometimes it's being humble. So let's find out what happens. So we're going to go within the Bible passage to verse 5. So we know that Naaman's master, his boss, sent a letter to the king of Israel. And, time's passed, so it's not Solomon anymore. But let's see what happens. Verse 5, here we go. By all means go, the king of Aram replied. I will send a letter to the king of Israel. So Naaman's really important. He was talking to the king of where he lived, right? So I will send a letter to the king of Israel. So Naaman left. But he just didn't leave like that. He left, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of clothing. So he took a lot of money and important, valuable items to buy his cure. We actually can kind of tell what the letter said. It said, with this letter, I am sending my servant Naaman to you, so you may cure him of leprosy. Pretty straightforward. Kings are powerful, but they aren't God, are they? Okay. Something happened. Naaman got to Israel. Naaman was able to get an audience with the king of Israel, and he gave him the letter. Now remember, in Israel, they didn't worship many gods. They worshiped our one God. And we know God is powerful, and we are not. So let's see what happens in verse 7. As soon as the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his robes and said, Am I God? Can I kill and bring back to life? Why does this fellow send someone to me to be cured of his leprosy? See how he's trying to pick a quarrel with me? There's a lot in there. Have you ever been someplace and seen someone tear their clothing? I haven't. There's something in the Jewish tradition where if you're really feeling emotional on the inside, like maybe you're mad or sad or angry, you show it on the outside by tearing your clothes. It didn't happen very often. This was a really big deal. So for the king to be so enraged that he tore his clothes, that's a pretty big deal. Because the king of Israel knows God. And the king of Israel knows that only God can heal. And that letter was asking him to do it. It's not his place. Naaman and Naaman's boss don't understand our God. So, what do you think happens next? Do you remember? Well, I guess it was such big news that the king tore his clothing that the news traveled and someone heard about it, named Elijah, the man of God. So we know he was a prophet, heard that the king of Israel had torn his robes. Again, it's a big deal. So he sent a message. Why have you torn your robes? Have this man come to me, and he will know that there is a prophet in Israel. So Naaman went with his horses and chariots. So he didn't just go by himself. He had a huge entourage, right? And stopped at the door of Elijah's house. Now this is interesting. Elijah sent a messenger to say to him. Elijah didn't come out to him. Elijah didn't come out to him. Now Naaman thinks he's pretty important as the head of this other king's armies. He was angry that Elisha didn't come out to meet him. And Elisha gave him a solution. Do you remember what it was? Go wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, or that's the river, and your flesh, your skin, will be restored and you will be cleansed. Do you remember what Naaman does? So verse 11 tells us, but Naaman went away angry. He was given a solution to do. Why was he angry? It's kind of funny what he says, I think. I thought that he, Elisha, would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, wave his hands over the spot and cure me of leprosy. Are not Abana and Pharpar, I'm probably saying them wrong, the rivers of Damascus better than any waters of Israel? Couldn't I wash in them and be cleansed? So, part of our God, if you remember, is we have to learn to trust him. We have to learn to trust that just because we want something doesn't mean that's part of God's plan or God's timing. And sometimes we have to wait. And sometimes we have to be patient. And sometimes God puts things in front of us that will help us, but we don't always see it. But he doesn't give up on us. He lets us make mistakes and he lets us come back to him. We're very, very lucky. Okay, do you want to know what happens next? What do you think Naaman does? We know Naaman's mad and Naaman leaves, right? Well, God did place someone around Naaman to help him. One of his servants talked to him. Do you remember what he says? Let me find the right place. So now I'm in verse 13. Naaman's servant went to him and said, my father. I know that kind of sounds strange because it's not his dad, but that's just how they worded things back then. My father, if the prophet had told you to do some great things, would you have done it? How much more then when he tells you wash and be cleansed? Right? So Naaman wanted some big thing to do or some magical thing to happen to him in his mind. But the servant pointed out, you were given a solution, just try it, right? So he went down and dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times, as the man of God had told him. And, do you remember what happens? His flesh, his skin was restored, and he became clean like that of a young boy. So even though Naaman didn't believe in the way that our God works, like he wanted some big thing to happen, he still did it. I wonder if secretly he was willing to try anything for his skin to feel better. Let's see. Then Naaman and all of his attendants went back to the man of God. So that's Elisha. And he stood before him and said, now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel. Please accept now a gift from your servant. So I wonder if Naaman had been trying to get healed for years. And so he thought he needed something big to happen. But he didn't. He just needed God. And he trusted, and he went to the river and he did what he was told. Okay. The prophet Elisha answers, as surely as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will not accept a thing. Remember, God loves us. We don't have to pay him or sacrifice for him to help us. Remember? Jesus did that on the cross for us. Okay, so Naaman, remember, he kept trying to give him the gold and the silver and the garments, the clothing, the fabric. The prophet's like, nope. Then it was kind of interesting. So right now, you realize that Elijah and God have converted the head of a neighboring army to believe in our God. That's a pretty big deal. So we also know that Elisha is not going to accept any money for this, right? Or reward, so to speak. So there was something interesting that happens next. Which is, Naaman asks God to forgive him. He knows he's going to do one thing that I think he's afraid our God may not like. Did you catch it? So we're going to jump to verse 18. But may the Lord forgive your servant for one thing. So, in other words, Will God forgive Naaman for doing one thing that he knows isn't right? When my master enters the temple of Rimmon, because remember, when Naaman goes home, he lives in a place that worships many gods, and one must be in this temple of Rimmon. Okay, to bow down, and he is leaning on my arm, and I bow there also. When I bow down in the temple of Rimmon, may the Lord forgive your servant for this. So think about this. It sounds like maybe his king maybe needs help walking, and he has Naaman, but maybe he holds Naaman's arm and walks into this temple. And when the king bows, Naaman bows also. Now Naaman realizes he's bowing down to the wrong God. And he has the frame of mind, even after all this excitement's happened and he's healed and his eyes have been opened that there's just one God, he realizes that when he goes home, he's going to bow down to the wrong gods. And he wants to tell our God about that and ask for his forgiveness. What do you think happens? Go in peace, Elisha says. After Naaman had traveled some distance. Oh, we won't worry about that. That's the next part. So we know Elisha says, go in peace. So that is kind of saying God understands. Remember, no matter what we do, God knows what's in our hearts and how we feel. Okay? And now God knows Naaman's heart. That's a pretty exciting conversion to our God. Don't you think? The head of the army now believes in our God. That's pretty cool. Well, I think our time together has come to a close this week. So can we pray? Okay. God, thank you. Thank you for being part of our lives, even when we don't see it. Thank you for never giving up on us. Thank you for never giving up on people that don't know you yet. They're just waiting to meet you. Please keep us safe this week. Let us enjoy Thanksgiving. Oh, actually, by the time I'm filming this early, so let me enjoy Thanksgiving this week. I hope you all have had a great Thanksgiving, and I'll see you next week. Bye. I got ahead of myself, guys. Take care. Bye.